National Treasury's carbon tax paper, released in May of this year, provides concrete plans detailing how the implementation of carbon tax will be phased in to reduce long-term emissions. Currently, South Africa is the continent's top greenhouse gas producer and wants to cut CO2 emissions by a third over the next decade. The discussion paper, titled Reducing Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Facilitating the Transition to a Green Economy, proposes the use of carbon tax both as a deterrent measure and also as an incentive to regulate industries. Critics say Treasury must rethink its carbon tax, arguing that it will have a negative effect on the economy, the industry and jobs. They say the plan does not take into account South Africa's heavy dependency on coal or the effect that such a tax might have on the price of electricity. Well, on the forum at 8, the question we're asking is, how will the implementation of carbon tax address poverty and inequality? A very good morning to my guests in the studio with me, Ishmael Momoniat, Deputy Director General of the National Treasury, Thembinkosi Dlamini, Governance Manager at Oxfam, responsible for fiscal policies, tax and domestic resources mobilization. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you both and welcome.
Good morning, Tsapiso, and thank you for inviting me, and good morning to the listeners.
Good morning, Tsapiso. Thanks for inviting us.
Ralph Mateja is Managing Director, founder of Clear Content, and he's an independent policy analyst. A very good morning to you as well.
Good morning, Tsapiso, and to the gentleman in studio.
Let me start with you, Mr. Mamonia. So you've released the document and you're in the process of public consultation. What is the feedback that you're getting so far?
Look, it's a bit early to tell about all the submissions because we still have till the 2nd of August. But having said that, this is an issue that we've been engaging with players for a few years now. And we've been invited to many workshops, so we're getting a sense of the responses. I think, firstly, let's just say that, the big issue is that we do have greenhouse gas emissions. It's a threat to the world. We do need globally coordinated action on this. And certainly with regard to South Africa, we've committed ourselves to certain targets. And the most effective instrument, we believe, in the Treasury is through a carbon tax. Now, when you introduce any tax, you'll always find that, people are quite reluctant to just agree to it. It's something they perhaps reluctantly agree. But the issue is that if we want to reduce emissions, we do need to price carbon. And we believe that the carbon tax is the most effective mechanism to do so. And this tax is not about imposing costs now, but it's about serving notice on companies, on emitters, that you've got 5 to 10 years to adjust, get your new technology that's cleaner, so that when this tax really kicks in very steeply in 5 or 10 years' time, that then you will actually benefit from the fact that you have a clean technology, and you'll be, in fact, ahead of the curve with regard to your competitors.
But I imagine that in doing that, you would be able to, at least some extent, measure the levels of emissions and the impact thereof, and who is mostly responsible.
Ideally, we want the polluter to pay. But, everyone who emits, you can't reach out to them, because you and I emit every time we switch on a light or we get hot water, you're using energy and so on. So we do it more upstream, that it's at the point where you are, at the point of, closer to the point of generation. That's where we want to start. That's the easy point. Down the line, yes, we would like to get to the emitters, and certainly when you look at major corporates who kind of emit, we could try and reach that point, but that's something that you have to phase over time.
Well, Mr. Dlamini, let's come to you. You've seen the proposal by government. What is your reaction to what is proposed?
Well, thanks, Tsapiso. I think from our point of view, the very important issue is the issue of trying to reduce emissions on the overall. So the proposal should try in as much as possible to do that. And then down the line, our sort of issues have to do with how to use the carbon revenues in order to eradicate poverty and inequality in South Africa. Because we are thinking that the people who will be most affected by global warming and all the things that come with emissions are mostly the poorest people in society who cannot no longer rely on their coping mechanisms and things that they use for their day-to-day livelihood. So looking at the paper is a very good start. However, we believe that we need to engage more than just National Treasury being invited to a few workshops by those people who have the resources and obviously have an interest in the matter, but National Treasury also going out to consult and engaging with the citizens and especially poor people.
Who are the ones who are affected most?
Well, if you look at the issue of global warming as a result of the emissions, poorer people can no longer, for instance, have a backyard garden. And when Mr. Monomia talks about up the line in terms of imposing a tariff to the emitter at generation level, it means your electricity bill at some point will come in higher than what it is at the current moment. Now, poorer households tend to be hit hardest by those changes because they are already living on the line. So we think that any measures that are being proposed should take into account those issues around how we respond to poorer people and how we reduce their reliance on the national electricity grid.
Mr. Mateja, just to come to you then, you say that the assumption that is made is that a developing country like South Africa is more vulnerable to a sudden shift towards green economies because the necessary technology to offset this shift is not yet available locally.
Well, this is it's a common explanation that comes if you look at the potential impact of this tax. And I have to say that from the beginning that the document is fairly straightforward on its proposal. It's about a 91-page document stating the phasing-in approach and trying to calculate as well the impact of that tax on the economy. And as Mr. Momoniat mentioned, the main objective here is to try to build a situation where companies are going, or polluters are going to change their behavior. So the tax is meant to be, first of all, deterrent on further pollution. But number two, the money that is collected on the tax as well and the manner in which the tax is implemented should be done in a way that it also encourages adoption of greener ways in which the companies can go about their ways of production. So the first point where you start having a problem is that South Africa is not yet mandated to engage in this tax, engage in a mandatory reduction of emissions according to the Kyoto Protocol. So we are at the point where we see there is a need to act as a country, but we are not yet mandated to do so. So there has been question that the level of development in South Africa's economy, the technologies that we are going to have to borrow or buy technology from other countries so that we can be able to shift our ways of production from pollution-intensive to more greener means. A good example that is often given is that you look at the solar heating system that are being installed to reduce reliance on electricity, which is the main contribution. The generation of electricity is the main contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the solar heating equipment are bought from China. You do not yet have the economy that generates those technologies in a way that you could say shifting towards lower emissions will also bring about more opportunities within the economy.
Another criticism you have about the proposal is that it does not provide an integrated strategy on how carbon tax can be used to alleviate poverty and inequalities in this country. Why do you say that?
It relies a lot. If you look at the document from the beginning to the end, it relies a lot on the quantification of the impact of the tax on the production of goods in South Africa, and it prices the carbon tax also on the basis of that as well. But if you look at closely observing as to what other means are being proposed to shift the communities towards greener ways, it doesn't come out so much. And again, we could say that it's not so entirely Treasury's responsibility to come up so much on other policy issues here. This is where you need the Department of Environmental Affairs to be more creative and say that the introduction of this tax is not just going to be a collection of revenues, but it needs to be understood in line with the integrated approach to drive the economy towards much more greener ways.
Well, let's get ArcelorMittal on the line, 0891 104 208. Do give us a call. Ray in South Coast, Eddie in Vicksburg. I'm coming to you in just a moment. Ralph, perhaps if I could just get you to respond to that. Mr. Momoniat says he disagrees with you on the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. No.
No. Let me clear. I support the transparency. Sorry, Ralph. I support the transparency initiative, and I've argued for more transparency. I think the issue here is on earmarking specifically.
You said I differ with Ralph on this.
On the earmarking.
Okay.
On the transparency, definitely we need to do that.
Yes, so I think that I worked at Treasury. I understand the budget. I used to analyze the budget, and indeed we are rated as one of the most transparent countries. But when you look at the tracking of performance of our budget, if you are going to do auditing of performance of how we execute the budget, where we spend it, the outcomes, you are getting a completely different picture altogether. I believe that if you introduce a current transparency regime on how you are going to allocate and spend this revenue, you are also going to be able to respond to the skeptics who are saying to you, all you want is to generate more revenue and put it into the general fiscus. You will therefore be able to be very clear and demonstrate step by step how this entire tax regime is going to impact upon the reduction of greenhouse emission. And just a quick one on those who say that the tax is going to destroy the economy. I think that is not true, because if you look at Treasury's phasing in 15 years, which I support, and I think Treasury is too conciliatory on this one, is that they actually offer in the first 5 years a 60% non-taxable emission on the total emission of the company, which means a company will only pay for 40% of its total tonnage of emission. There are other additional discounts up to 90%, and agriculture actually is given 40%, which means for the first 5 years, agriculture is effectively exempt. I cannot think of a better conciliatory means of introducing a tax such as this one.
Ray, in the South Coast, you say it won't alleviate anything.
No. What are they going to do? If we stop burning our coal, we're going to export it to China or India, and they will have no problem with burning it. So it's still going in the atmosphere.
Thanks a lot, Ray. Rupert in Cape Town?
My question was, are we taxing goods which are imported if we're not knowing how they're being created? So in the case of steel, the steel's manufactured in China and they're generating it with coal plants, they're generating the electricity with coal. They're now able to import it at a lower cost to what we can manufacture it locally. So is there a way in the sort of World Trade Organization agreements that you can now tax imported goods without sort of having these import tariffs, which essentially would be import tariffs, to protect local businesses?
Thanks a lot, Rupert. Well, as I mentioned, we do have on the line Group Manager for Environment at ArcelorMittal Africa, Siege Spanik. A very good morning to you, and thank you very much for speaking to us.
Good morning to everyone in the studio and to all the listeners. Now, we as ArcelorMittal are very concerned about the proposed carbon tax, as it will have a severe financial impact on our operations. Although there is still uncertainty about various issues in the carbon tax discussion paper, the estimated financial impact will be in the region of 600 million rand, which is more than 50% of our earnings or EBITDA of late, which is a totally disproportionate tax load to bear. Another challenge, however, is that there is no alternative low-carbon technology available to reduce emissions by the percentages that climatologists are calling for. In other words, the National Treasury can tax us to death. We will not be able to change our behavior, which is the fundamental objective of the carbon tax. The fact that this aspect is ignored indicates to us that the carbon tax is nothing more than a collection exercise for additional revenue.
Well, let's get Mr. Momoniat to answer you just on that point. I'll allow you to raise your other point, Mr. Spanik, if I could just get Mr. Momoniat to respond to that.
You know, it's hard to respond when people when a company says that, are they going to be transparent and tell us how much taxes they actually pay? Because this information is confidential, but nothing stops ArcelorMittal by saying how much taxes they pay, because I'll be very skeptical about his comments. And returning to the earlier point on transparency, I think the Treasury would welcome any comments. I think we are looking at the EITI, and we are very concerned with number 2, and even when we were number 1, we didn't think we're perfect. We think that there are many measures to improve transparency in the budgeting system, and I would take it further to improve the performance and accountability issues on transparency. So I think that on those issues, the point is we agree that we need to do more.